This is Tailgate Ted.
I'm Ari Meroff from PFF.
Hey guys, it's Brittany Wagner from Last Chance U.
This is Ken Harvey.
I'm NFL Jeff Prospect. Kwame Lewis.
I'm Renee Washington.
Kendall Fuller. And I'm Fred Smoot.
This is Logan Thomas.
I'm Jonathan Allen.
I'm London Fletcher, the captain.
I'm Julie Donaldson, and you are watching.
And you're watching?
And you are watching
Ref the District.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Ref the District's After the Whistle, where we go beyond sports. I'm Nathan, that's the Stoner, and that's Trev. And we are really excited about today's guest. It is, in fact, the legend himself, the funny man, the sportscaster, Kenny Mayne. And we're really happy to have him on. And Trev, what makes you so excited to have Kenny on today?
Oh, man, I'm a huge Sports Center fan. It stays on my TV. Nothing else ESPN does. And growing up, watching him on Sports Center, he's one of the ESPN GOATs. So I'm pretty stoked to be talking to him today. So that's why I'm excited.
Yeah, and so you weren't as young as Trev is growing up with Mr. Mayne, but what makes you so excited?
You know what's funny about it is that he came in kind of during a time where it was Sports Center itself and just sports broadcasting was kind of blowing up at that time. Mm-hmm. And that's what I watched every single night. And most people did. 6 o'clock, 11 o'clock, you watch Sports Center because that was the greatest show. And Kenny was on there all the time. And so super, super excited to be able to talk to him about that. And of course, all his new projects he's got going on.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you guys. Grew up with him. Just loved his delivery, his humor, the way that he just broadcasts in general. It's super exciting to have him on. This is, in fact, the Odyssey original podcast, Hey Mayne, the Kenny Mayne Talks to Famous People podcast. You might know him as a former ESPN anchor. It is the legendary Kenny Mayne. Welcome to the show here with us, Ref the District. We appreciate you coming on here with you. We're going to make you the big screen because you are our guest. No one needs to see Stoner's face there. Thank you, Mr. Mayne, for joining us here on After the Whistle here on Ref the District. You know, I brought up your podcast. What made you go into the podcast game? You've had some pretty, good names there that, start off. You've only a few episodes in, but you've already had Chris Berman, Jamal Crawford, Christopher Guest. What is it like for you running this podcast game?
It gives me something to do on a Tuesday, really, if you want to be honest about it. After I left ESPN about a little over a year ago, and spent last summer just not quite sure what was going to be next. Just, had a few different options right away and did a commercial or two, did the Olympics for Peacock. So some of those things kind of lined up the moment I said I was leaving ESPN. I got a call from NBC, had a commercial thing halfway done. I got called by EA Sports to the Madden commercial. And so I looked at it like, all right, summer's paid for. Let's worry about September. Because I really, I went from whatever I was making to zero, in one day. And while I sort of thought about it, podcasting was one option, but I ended up lining up a deal with Caesars. So I do a lot of videos for them. I just was at Del Mar for the opener, shot with the Mannings and JB Smoove a few weeks ago in New Orleans. So periodically I go either to an event or maybe a commercial shoot or, just some reason to go to Vegas, opening of March Madness or the draft or, a big event, and go there and kind of create stuff that I do. They use it how they use it. And that's pretty consistent. The podcast was an addition and totally separate from that, different company. But I'm glad I made the choice. It's been really fun. Like literally just the doing of it is fun, talking to these people, very interesting folks. A lot of them I knew. Jamal's a good friend. Some of the others I'm pretty close to. Others I knew a little and then got to know more by virtue of doing this.
Yeah. And you talk about Jamal, who's a Seattle area basketball legend. You grew up in Washington and a lot of people don't know this, but we know this because we're big Kenny Mayne fans, but you were a JUCO All-American quarterback in college and then played 2 years at UNLV. So was there a moment while you were at UNLV where you said, okay, maybe I'm a little bit more of a broadcaster than I am a quarterback for my career?
I mean, I tried to play on from there. I signed with Seattle, but I failed the physical for my ankle. And we, by the way, have a veterans foundation called Run Freely. We're giving these devices to veterans who need them, like I do. I got kind of a ruined ankle from a play that happened in my junior year. But yeah, I was no big star. I was second string. A kid named Sam King was ahead of me. He led the nation in passing yards. Randall Cunningham was behind us. He was brand new freshman.
Wow.
You could tell he was going to be what he turned out to be. But as a freshman, you know, I mean, we knew the offense. Sam was the starter, and it was what it was. But I didn't even want to do sports, to tell you the truth. I was studying broadcasting and political science and wanted to be like working for Frontline by now, or, you know, doing documentaries or serious news. It just so happened that when I got to the Seattle station, it took a while to get on the air. It was like 2 or 3 years of kind of background work and then producing and writing. And then somebody named Alice Blanchard quit, and they had a hiring freeze, and they looked at me like, all right, I guess you're on now. So it was funny how I even got into it. And that was to do news. Then our little station was so small, we only had Monday through Friday. So when they added the weekends, we always used to say, if there's news on the weekends, it's news to us. That was our motto. But when they added the weekend show, the news director's like, you played football, you're doing sports. So I almost just kind of tripped into both things, both getting my first chance to get on the air in a good market. And then second was actually starting to do sports. And then within 2 or 3 years, I was approaching ESPN and kind of trying to make that be my focus.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of segued into my question with that. So you turned your focus to ESPN, and I also saw, and since I'm a huge Kenny Mayne fan as well, you sent your letter was pretty much saying, hey, will you guys hire me? And you wanted them to check a box. And I think one of the boxes even said, we will hire you when ESPN 5 comes out. How did you come about, like, building up the courage and the bravery to shoot your shot, as they say now, to ESPN and get going?
Well, to begin with, remember the Joe Montana to John Taylor Super Bowl, the 49ers beat the Bengals. That was 1989, I believe, and had a good show that night. And it was almost just on a total lark. I was like, I should send a tape to ESPN, see what they say. Like, all they can do is say no, right? It's not going to hurt me to try it. Instead, they called back a guy named Al Jaffe. He said, send us another tape. We want to see if that was a fluke. And so I sent him another show, and then I kept kind of chasing him. Ended up going back for an interview. I didn't get hired. Went back to the station where I was working. Some months later, I quit that job, sort of short notice. Not exactly the smartest thing I've ever done, but I did. And now I don't have a TV job, but I'm still trying to get hired by ESPN. And I just paid bills. You know, I had a Honda bill to pay and insurance and all the regular stuff people have. I made garbage cans. I sold prepaid legal insurance. I sold long distance for MCI. And all the while I was doing those things just to pay bills. And again, nothing against people doing those jobs. Some people would want that. But I was just grabbing whatever job I could grab while I tried to stay alive in getting looked at for TV, which there were people who thought I was out of my mind. Like, dude, you're trying to get hired at ESPN. You were selling long distance to, you know, Acme Dog Food Company.
Whatever it takes, bro.
All that time that I'm speaking of here, this is like 89 through 94, I guess. ESPN was using me quite a lot. They would call and say, you know, Griffey hit 2 home runs. Go interview him before the game. Send it on the satellite. We want to use it on baseball tonight. Or sometimes I did actual full-blown stories, like I was the reporter. And the letter you spoke of, that was pretty late in the game. I was kind of getting frustrated. Like, how long am I going to do this? I kind of proven that I belong there. At least I thought I did. And they're still just stringing me along. So I sent that note as sort of a wake up, just like, let's see if this shakes anything up back there. And turns out I got hired a couple months later. I can't say it was because of that letter necessarily, but it all turned out okay.
Yeah, it's dope.
Now you said you had quite a few jobs there in between those 2 jobs, and I might be able to relate. So and we appreciate the support you're giving our veterans. Stoner is a retired Air Force vet. I have 1 year left before I'm a retired Air Force vet. So thank you for that. Next year, I might be looking for those kind of jobs to kind of keep me afloat. Which one was your favorite?
Wow. Well, it would have to be probably the third one, because I was legitimate. I had insurance. It was a real job. There's people who make careers in sales, obviously. And this is at the time people now don't even get. I mean, I guess if you still have a home phone, you must pay somebody, right? You pay the local service and somebody for long distance. But there was a time where that, remember the commercials on TV. Do you want to go to Sprint or do you want to go to AT&T or MCI and all that? So I'd say that because that gave me sort of a better base to feel more comfortable about this other stuff I was trying. ESPN wasn't the only one. I did stuff for NBA Entertainment. I got to meet Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam that way. He and Sean Kemp were doing a poster shoot, and I ended up going and making a story about the shoot. Did stuff for TSN in Canada, Prime. I'm forgetting it. Oh, sometimes I would just invent work. I always tell that to kids who feel like, what are my options? And I think people have more options today. Hell, you can start a website in 5 minutes, right? If you know how to do it. And now you got a website, and now you're broadcasting. So my day, there was no such thing. You had the local stations, the local radio and newspaper, and that was it. But I would sometimes sort of create work. So if the Seahawks had a home game, I would get the black book and I would call, all 7 TV stations in whatever city. Are you sending a crew to Seattle for the game? If the answer was no, I'd explain who I was, what I've done. I'd do the ESPN stuff. And a few times I was able to, create new work. And it just gave me more experience doing it. It was always a thing where if you do one thing, the next thing you do is hopefully better, and the third thing's better, and you keep trying to grow.
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking off of that, those different types of jobs and meeting all different kinds of people, and especially I would think in that show that you did, the wider world of sports, right? So you've been all over, you've met all kinds of people. Is there anybody that you met along the way that kind of stopped the room, where everybody just kind of, they say like when Muhammad Ali walks in a room, the room just kind of stops and the air is sucked out because of his presence. Have you had that happen with anybody that you've met along the way in all these travels and all these different shows you've done?
I'd say Stevie Wonder. I got in fact, way back when I was first starting at that little station in Seattle, he was going on a concert tour, and the first stop was Seattle. So they were going to go to the Coliseum, which is now the Climate Pledge Arena, and do a rehearsal. And I talked to my boss, says, hey, let me go. Stevie Wonder's in town. So we go up there, and we weren't supposed to interview him. We're supposed to just take B-roll and get out. But one reporter ran up to the stage, starts talking to him. So all the rest of us, go running up, trying to chase it. I was so nervous. My mic is just like, I'm shaking. I ended up setting it on his keyboards and on his keys, and all of a sudden he's talking, but you hear like, like in the middle of it, and he just turned it down to 0, and didn't have a problem with it. So years later, I worked with him like 2 or 3 more times. Years later, I told him that story and said, I've always told people that we've collaborated. I brought it up. But I got him to say, I can't be at the baseball all-star game. I have a high ankle sprain. That was his key line. And I did a real interview with him before the Detroit Super Bowl, because he was the warm-up before the game. Rolling Stones played at halftime. And when he was a kid, he used to open for the Rolling Stones. So,
wow.
He'd be the one, I'd say, of everything.
That's pretty cool. So, Mr. Mayne, can you just kind of touch on or elaborate on like the grind that you went through to be a SportsCenter anchor? Because I know growing up, you didn't just talk about the highlights. Your puns and your ad libs were amazing. And if you didn't really pay attention to that, some people might think like, oh, you're weird, he's crazy or whatever. But like, if you listen like to what you said, you made SportsCenter. So like, can you just kind of touch on like, did you have a lot of homework? Like, how did that process, the grind behind the scenes, work to be a SportsCenter anchor?
Well, I think I was probably fortunate because when I first got hired, I was hired for ESPN2. In fact, I remember them saying, don't have any aspirations of being on SportsCenter. You're over here on the second channel. And that show that we were working on kind of got killed pretty quick. And so they had to put us somewhere, right? Like I started covering car racing, which I do nothing about, but grew to like it. Stuart was doing some NBA. Pete was doing hockey. Susie went to football and X game stuff. Like we all, got dispersed in different places. And then eventually you got the call, like you're doing SportsCenter next Wednesday or whatever it was. And this is a time where, getting to do it once or twice a month was like a big deal. Like you were, I still remember my first one. Larry Beal was the co-host. very warm, nice guy. So he made it nice and easy, like you got to kind of, and I tried to do the same for other new people as time went on, just make them feel comfortable. Don't make them feel like they're overwhelmed or you're going to hug the show or, just try to be a teammate, right? Be a good teammate.
Mm-hmm.
And he was that for sure. But yeah, I'd say the first couple years after you got through it and realized, oh, I can do this. Like, you're still making mistakes and you got to catch up some of the names or whatever the case. But once you kind of felt what the show feels like and the pattern of it and the timing of it, then you started gaining more confidence and you wanted to do more, like ready for a full schedule. So by, I don't even know what, 97, somewhere in there, I'm forgetting all the years exactly. I was doing it with much more regularity. And remember Keith Olbermann, actually he benefited me twice because he left Sports Night on ESPN2, went back to be with Dan Patrick on one.
Mm-hmm.
Stuart then moved up to be the anchor with Susie. They needed one more guy to do the lower level job, and that was me. So they called me. I get hired from Seattle. I move out here, started doing that in May of 94. And then, like I said, a year or so later, that show was dropped and we all started doing other stuff. But when Keith left the next time to leave ESPN, they needed somebody to line up with Dan, right? Because he couldn't do a solo show. So I feel like for 6 months, they just kind of rotated people. Somebody do it for 3 days, somebody do it for a week or whatever. And all the while they were kind of like seeing who fit with him, who matched with him. And I didn't really try for it. It wasn't like I was, hey, I want to be the guy. It was more, just do your job well. And turned out they picked me soon after. And Dan and I did it for a couple of years together. And, I've done like 40 different things, when all is said and done. You mentioned The Wider World. We did Main Street, the comedy show. We did the football stories. I'm forgetting half the stuff I did. Just some stuff for the magazine. Did a game show with Michael Davies way back when. Remember the 2-minute drill?
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I never did I did it one time, and I think they saw their mistake. I filled in for Bill Pito on NHL Tonight, and we use what's called shot sheets. So I don't know if they're universally used at this point, but basically it's like notes that match what's on the video, right? And so you could be handed a sheet and they roll the tape 1 second later, first inning, so-and-so's up, so-and-so home run, they lead 2-0, right? You can kind of use those notes and look at the screen back and forth and throw in your whatever your style is or do it straight, whatever you do. They gave me a shot sheet for a hockey game, and they said it was going to be like 40 seconds long, like 2 or 3 plays. But they ran the wrong tape. They ran the 4-minute tape of the same game. And I'm looking at so I was at least quick enough to say, Barry Melrose, thank God, was with me. I said, Barry, you've always wanted to call a highlight by yourself. And I walked out of the room. I went in the hall, got water. I could hear him in my ear. So those things happen. Cool. But sometimes the chaos was actually kind of fun. I remember about a year ago, last May of 21, we had a show where there was a no-hitter, and the last pitch of the no-hitter happened at 58 or 59 almost. So we had 1 minute and a half to totally reorganize what we were doing at the top of the show, which was not predicted to be a no-hitter, right? And those times are really fun. You're reliant on other people, but you get a good relationship with the different producers. You trust they're never going to put you in a place where you're just going to crash. If you're doing something, they might be talking to the other person. Hey, after Kenny finishes such and such, you're going on to such and such. And I didn't even know that's happening. He's only talking to that person. So there's a lot of free form, but you always have underneath it, like a little safety net.
I kind of want to touch on my question I just asked you too. It's a little touchy one. What was your relationship working with Stuart Scott and the kind of impact he had on your career and still today?
Oh, I just saw his daughter the other day. She's doing great. Both girls are. And, we were very close. He had a lot of dear friends. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people that say, they were very close because he was very warm that way. And, we used to be, Stuart and I both had kids roughly at the same time. So, there was that with the little kids playing together and, just kind of growing up that way. He's also a electric football nerd like I was. You guys might not know what it is, but for those who don't know out there, it's a aluminum board, twice the size of Monopoly board, I guess you'd say, lengthwise. And these little tiny plastic men are on the field. You turn the machine on, they buzz around. And if the base is touched, that's when the tackle is made. Stuart and I would play that game while watching NFL. We'd keep stats. We were into it. So, but yeah, we basically came up at the same time. Like, he was a little ahead of me. He was, maybe 6 months, 8 months earlier than I was to ESPN, and just played flag football together. Went to movies together. Like, we definitely hung out. And when he passed, I still remember, exactly where I was hearing the news. But it was with a lot of people, it's the same thing where you start doing different jobs and you're just not around each other as much. You're working different hours or different events, and it doesn't mean your relationship fell apart or anything. It's just you're not in it like in the way that you were. Where for several years we'd see each other whether we were doing the same show together, or I was doing the 11 and he was the 1, or vice versa. Like, you just be around each other. So obviously those were good years.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up the comedy show. You definitely have your own brand of humor. Where does that come from? Like, where do you come up with your jokes? And is this something that you kind of inherited from your mom or dad, or is this just something you developed in your childhood?
Yeah, I'd say a little of everything. Johnny Carson, like timing, the pauses, the whatever. And I didn't think that watching him that I was studying it, but later when you do stuff, and I'm not comparing myself to Johnny Carson. I don't mean it that way. I just mean, you just like musicians are sort of informed by other musicians, right? Like certain people play a certain way, and somebody 20 years later kind of picks up on, oh, that's a certain way I can, not to copy it, but to just be influenced by it, right? So definitely him. Cartoons, the Bugs Bunny Hour.
Oh, wow.
Rocky and Bullwinkle, Flintstones, Jetsons, because when you really like break stuff down, how, that's what you're asking. Like, how did you become whatever you became? Good friends, Mark Sansevier, you don't know him, my dad, his friend Al Drake, my Uncle Gordy, some of my sister's boyfriends. You're like, just kind of mix it all together, and you definitely get influenced and kind of become the person you become. But I would also say, I answered this, somebody did one of those things on Twitter, describe what you do without saying what you do, one of those little quiz. And for me, it's like I've gotten paid to do what used to get me sent out in the hall, right? right. Like, you're in class, something happens, what's the one line you can kill the room with? Sometimes that would get you sent out, sometimes they'd all laugh, but yeah.
That's cool.
I don't think I had Bugs Bunny and the Jetsons on my Kenny Mayne bingo card before we started that was going to come up, but
or electric football for that.
Football,
that takes me back. That was a lot of fun growing up.
I think one of the great things about people from my time when I was watching you every night in the mid 90s comes from the This Is Sports Center commercials. Those are some of the best commercials. They're hilarious, and how they depict mascots being an everyday part of the ESPN newsroom. It's just hilarious. But I will say this, that my wife gets annoyed with me by this. I still, to this day, if I scream at a baseball game or something, she says, "What happened?" I always turn to her and I say, "Home run." I do that all the time. And she gets annoyed with me. She goes, "Where do you get that from?" And I say, there's this Kenny Mayne. He used to say that all the time.
Well,
what would you say?
We were at a dinner, ESPN threw one of those dinners, like, to get to know other people in the company, and there was a bunch of Sports Center people with a bunch of foreign language broadcasters who covered soccer and baseball and whatnot. And there was a Spanish speaking guy next to me, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, I've been saying quadrangular for home run when it's a Hispanic player." And I said, "How do you actually say home run in Spanish? Am I close?" And he said, "You say it home run." So ever since that day, not every time, but I'd say 90% of the time, if it was Latino hitting a home run, you home run.
were those commercials,
and it's meant with respect, obviously. It was
yeah, for sure.
Were those commercials as fun to make as they were for us to watch them?
Oh yeah. The funny thing about a great majority of those is you'd be in them if you were already working. You didn't, I mean, sometimes you came in on an off day or whatever, but more often it was like, well, who's in the building on Thursday? We have these 4 scripts. Stuart is going to do that one. Kenny will do that one. You know, like sometimes they thought ahead and they really wanted me to do a certain one or Stuart to do a certain one or whatever. But there were many other times where I think the directors and producers of it were like, who's on staff today? So we'd be getting ready to do a show. You know, we're on at 11 o'clock or whatever the case. And at 8:30, you're running down the hall, you know, doing some stupid thing for 45 minutes. And we shot them quick. You know, I've done a bunch of commercials that take 8 and 10 hours to make one bit. Like I did the Black Panther commercial a couple years ago. And that was intense. I mean, we went on and on and on, reshot, re-angle, turn the cameras around, the whole thing. And all we made is the one thing. The Sports Center commercials, they'd easily make 3, 4, and even 5 sometimes one day. I'd say my favorite was Stuart and I at the basketball gym, where the premises that were given back to the community, Dan Patrick sets it up. And then Stuart and I immediately become jerks to these little kids, stealing the ball from them. Stuart checks some kid, you know, he's like 4 feet tall. The one with Dikembe Mutombo was fun, looking at cloud shapes.
Oh yeah. Yep, I remember that one.
There were a bunch.
Now, ESPN was obviously a large part of your life. You mentioned kind of getting the start in 1994 and just recently, you know, ending that. Was there ever really a time in the middle of all that you thought that you would never be with ESPN?
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple times where I looked at other things that didn't work out that would have been, you know, it just seemed like time to try something different. One was quite a while ago. It was Jimmy Kimmel's friend, Daniel Kellison, did a bunch of work, and he was throwing together an idea for like a takeoff on Daily Show, right? Have that on Comedy Central and then follow it with a sports show. And we took it all the way up to their top people. And for whatever reason, they didn't do it. They did do a similar show with Norm Macdonald for a bit, but that was definitely something that would have been interesting to be able to still cover sports, but not be bound by, you know, all the requirements of doing it, you know, professionally at ESPN, where you could not worry so much and just make the whole thing more fun, more jokes, less stats. Yeah.
Very nice.
Do you did you realize, this is my last question, boys, by the way, but did you realize that when you were, I assume you guys wrote your own scripts basically for Sports Center along, you know, with your producer, but you can tell because the style of it was your own. But did you realize that you were changing the game at the time because you were going, what we were used to is just watching, you know, a broadcast of the news, getting fed the news, but you guys were putting the comedy into it, the ad-libbing into it. Did you realize you were doing it, or you were just doing what came naturally and it ended up changing the game?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think, you know, because you never make that big a deal of yourself that I'm, you know, some big trailblazer or whatever. I was just part of a larger group that maybe collectively we all did alter, you know, how things have been done. But yeah, mainly you're trying not to screw it up. And then once you get comfortable, then you start having fun. But there was always a good little amount of nervousness. Shot sheets are coming in late. They're changing stories. There's some other distraction. You know, there's stuff that can throw you off and make the show not as good as it could have been. And then there's other shows that work flawlessly, that you just came out and had fun the whole time and said, that's how we should be doing it every time. I remember Bootsy Gross and I, you know, in recent years afterward, like, that wasn't bad, was it? Like, that's how we should do it every time. Whatever that thing was that night, that feel, the camaraderie, making each other laugh, like, that's what it should be. Now, obviously, when there are serious things, you got to be, I always said the same thing. I take serious things seriously and the rest less seriously, right? Like if there's a real story, a death or a crime or, you know, some kind of controversy and you have to lean back on your original journalism skills to write a legitimate, straight story, then we would, you know, like I think all of us have that ability. And then when it wasn't, when it was just team A playing team B, you'd try to have fun with the highlights. So it's almost like you're doing sometimes two different things in the same show. And you will always, on the shows, we're like, really? I get stuck with that. We'd give each other a hard time. Like, I got all the bad ones. I got I got the arrest. I got this. I got, So more often than not, though, I'd say 80% of the time, 90% of the time, we were out there having fun calling games.
That's
I
awesome.
love the immediacy of the game just ended. 3 minutes later, you're on the air, or it ends in the middle of the show, and you got to, the game just ended, and now let's go to the highlight. Here's Steph Curry, whatever. But that's kind of what kept it interesting and kept your adrenaline up.
And my last question for you is it incredible to see how fast the people put up highlights? Like you said, like as soon as the game ends, there's already a highlight package. Did you ever get to witness any of that firsthand, or were you just like, wow, like the game just ended and they're already showing highlights of what just happened literally 30 seconds ago? Like, what was that like?
I mean, well, there's ways to expedite it. Sometimes they're cutting ahead and they kind of have most of it ready and they're going to tack on the last few plays. Other times they literally just grab it in the control room, just roll back that last play. The technology's definitely improved. We used to use tape machines, and when we had to do edits to fix shows, if there was a mistake, we had to wait to get cued just to the perfect place. Where now digital, if I screw up a name during the commercial break, if the commercial's like 2 or 3 minutes long, they'll just say Krivo Krasov, and they shove that where people are.
Wow. That's
so they're
cool.
able to, not always, but pretty often they're able to clean up any messes as we go along. Then when the show's over, I'm talking about the last show, because the other shows, they're live, they start, they finish, they go home. The last show of the night is the one where you have to do the so-called fixes for the re-airs to make sure you don't have the wrong statistics or the wrong names or whatever the case. In fact, we did on the Main Street show, might have been my favorite one. It was me and Van Pelt, Allison Becker, and John Glazer. And the show was called Fixes. If you look up my name and the word Fixes, and it's all about me screwing up a name, and it's 5 a.m, and Van Pelt's talking about his marriage is falling apart, and he never sees his wife. Yeah, it was fun. And it was very true to, if you ever did the overnight show, everybody has lived through that. They can relate.
So I have a couple more questions for you. Early on, you brought up the vet, charity that you have. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I had what was called a fracture dislocation back in my junior year of college, and played the next year. And then kind of every year and every decade later, it just got worse and worse and worse, where I was in pretty bad way about 10 years ago, like barely wanted to get out of bed, because you're like, oh, now I got to stand on this thing, and went through a different brace, went through a lot of therapy, found a great guy in Seattle who kind of manipulated it back to life, so able to get by without the same kind of pain, but not able to do very much. Because if I put on tennis shoes, even if I played golf or tried to shoot baskets in the yard or whatever, just doing that one time would set me back 3 days, right? I'd be limping and have to get it back into gear. So I found this guy in Gig Harbor, Washington, and he makes this device called an ExoSim. I got mine like November of 2018, I think it was. And Gretchen and I immediately were like, let's do something good with this. Because in an instant, it changed my life. Like, I'm able to do a lot of things that I can't do otherwise, pain-free. Doesn't fix anything. It just lets you take your bad ankle, shove it in this device, and your bad ankle's sort of like along for the ride, right? The device displaces the pressure on the bad joint. So we started this thing called Run Freely, RUNFREELY, runfreely.org. And we're not like a big organization. I think we've helped 35, if I counted it up right recently. But every person we help immediately is in a different position than they were. Like, they're people having trouble even going to the store with their wife, or playing with their kid at the park, or little things that most of us take for granted. So we're trying to get bigger, try to do a couple like larger ticket events to draw in more notice and more money, and we can help more people that way. And but it's the old cliche: if you help 1 or 2 people, you've done something good. So
absolutely,
it's 35 people's lives that are improved now thanks to you. So again, we appreciate that support there that you're giving people. Going back to even that first question, as we talked about what you're doing now, what does the next 5 years look for Kenny Mayne? What do you predict is going to happen here in the next 5 years for you?
Well, after the comet hits, we're probably going to head west again. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, it's hard to predict a weekend. Like, we've been busy enough. Like, there's always something coming up, and it keeps things interesting. Like, Like I said, I just shot Del Mar, and then my daughter came out. We had a little fun. Got a little break right now. I got more podcast work this week, and then we're kind of done with the first season of the podcast. We'll restart taping again in probably September, maybe. I still want to do other stuff, though. We have a couple of projects that aren't bought yet, or, you know, who knows? They might work, they might not work. So I kind of have my hand in a couple other things that I'd love to do just to do it more than for the money. Obviously, if we get paid, that's great too. But we'll see if they come out. But I'm happy doing what I'm doing now. The stuff with Caesars is really fun. They send me to good places. You know, go out to
ESPN calls you back. You taking it?
Say again?
ESPN calls you back. You taking it?
What's the role?
Sports Center for 30 shows.
No, I'm good. I did that.
He said, "No, I'm good. I'm good."
It's nothing against the, you know. It's just I don't think they're calling anyway. But I think it'd be weird redoing something I already did.
Yeah.
Where I left, you know what I mean? Like I'm happy doing what I'm doing, and I'm getting. I got a ton of free time with my wife. I see the kids. We got 2 girls still in college. Gretchen and I each had 2 when we got married, so we have 4. One's graduated Boulder, Colorado. One's at Boston U, senior to be. One's at USC, sophomore to be. The last one's here, still in high school in Connecticut. So we're busy enough with all the stuff that we got right in front of us.
Well, you got to do something to pay that tuition, though. Those are not cheap schools that you just mentioned.
Yeah. No, that's why I'm happy and blessed. I got that good deal out of Caesars right away, and we'll see if the podcast. You know, we've only been out less than a month. What's the date today as we tape this? I don't know what date it is.
26
something. Yeah,
26. Yeah.
Well, now that you're on this podcast, your podcast game is definitely going to go up.
That's
more.
right. People are getting down. People are getting down.
Yeah.
Well, we do appreciate you jumping on here with us. This is the legendary ESPN anchor Kenny Mayne joining us for an After the Whistle. Yeah, we're going to give him another round of applause here with the sound button here. We appreciate you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Of course, you can catch him on his own show, as he's mentioning there, an Odyssey original called Hey Mayne, the Kenny Mayne Talks to Famous People podcast there on Odyssey, and all those other exciting things. Definitely going to keep track of those and see where you end up next. But thank you for joining us. And until next time,
what's that?
Be a fan.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for having me. That was fun.